Marlon Brando's final days. Loneliness and regrets. Once Hollywood's most captivating and rebellious star, Marlon Brando spent his final years weighing 160 kilograms, confined to his Mulholland Drive mansion like a prisoner. Two of his children had died tragically. Cheyenne had taken her own life. Christian had rotted in prison for years. This giant of acting no longer appeared before cameras and barely accepted phone calls. When he looked in the mirror each morning, who did he see staring back? That young, fiery man who believed he could change the world, or an aged shadow who had lost everything? Today I'm going to tell you about Marlon Brando's final years that nobody wanted to see, his regrets, and the secrets of the journals he destroyed before his death. Before you continue watching this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications, because I'll keep sharing Hollywood's darkest secrets with you. Now let's discover together how a legend fell apart. In the autumn of 1999, something strange was happening on Mulholland Drive. Brando's neighbors talked about peculiar sounds coming from the mansion at night. Sometimes crying, sometimes screams, sometimes hours of silence. It was known that the former movie star never left his house, but nobody could imagine how dire the situation had become. The mailbox remained empty for days. Even the gardeners weren't allowed inside. Brando's mansion had turned into a ghost house, and so had the man inside. One of the neighbors, real estate agent Richard Perkins, told a local newspaper, "Sometimes when I drive home at midnight, I see a blue light from Brando's windows. I assume it's the television, but hours pass, and that light never goes out. It stays on until morning. I wonder what he's watching, or is he just sitting in front of that light, lost in thought?" In early 2000, producer Bert Schneider, one of Brando's old close friends who visited him, was shocked by what he saw. All the windows of the house were covered with thick curtains, and inside was almost completely dark. Brando sat buried in a giant armchair in the living room, and there was no trace of those sharp eyes he once had. His eyes were tired and lost, as if a part of his soul had already departed. According to Schneider, the first thing Brando said to him was, "I can't see myself in the mirror anymore, Bert. I only see a stranger." These words were so painful that years later, Schneider's eyes still welled up when remembering that moment. Schneider later added in a documentary, "Marlon talked to me about his children that day. He described Cheyenne's final days, Christian's state in prison. There was deep guilt in every word. It was as if with every breath in, he was inhaling this guilt, and with every breath out, he was dying a little more." So what exactly brought Marlon Brando to this state? Was it just old age, or the accumulation of tragic events from the last 20 years of his life? The answer is both, but the real reason lay much deeper. In his autobiography, Brando wrote, "As an actor, I learned to be other people throughout my life, but I never learned to be myself." This sentence perhaps summarized his entire tragedy. Had a man who played roles for most of his 70-year life finally lost his own identity? Brando's existential crisis actually traced back to his childhood. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was a cold and distant man, a successful sales representative but a terrible father. His mother, Dorothy, was a talented amateur actress who had dreamed of Broadway but couldn't realize those dreams and surrendered to alcoholism. Young Marlon had seen his mother drunk many times, witnessed his father yelling at her. The tension at home was so high that by the time Marlon turned 16, he was sent to military school. But he couldn't adapt there either and was expelled for being undisciplined. These early traumas became wounds that Brando would carry throughout his life. In 1989, the tragedy that befell his son Christian became the point of no return in Brando's life. Christian had killed his sister Cheyenne's boyfriend Dag Drolet in Brando's mansion. The details of that night are still debated, but what is known is this: Christian had learned that Cheyenne was being beaten by Dag and went to Brando's house in rage. Dag was there watching television. Christian grabbed the gun, started talking to Dag, and then fired a single shot. The bullet hit Dag's face, and the young man died right there. When Brando arrived home, the floors were covered in blood. Christian was walking around in panic, and Cheyenne was screaming. That night, Brando's world changed forever. The trial process was long and painful. Brando testified in court tearfully, tried to defend his son, but deep down he didn't even know what was right or wrong anymore. Christian received a 10-year prison sentence, and Brando was never the same again. His friends said that after this incident, his soul was broken. Brando told reporters leaving the courthouse, "I didn't spend enough time with my children. I was always somewhere else, doing other things. Now we're paying the price for that." But the real devastation had not yet come. 3 years later, in 1995, his daughter Cheyenne hanged herself. In her home in Tahiti, at 25 years old, she ended her life. Cheyenne had been struggling with schizophrenia for years, and witnessing the murder Christian committed had made her condition even worse. Her mental health had completely collapsed. She had attempted suicide multiple times. Brando had sent her to Tahiti, perhaps thinking she would calm down there, but the outcome of this decision was disastrous. Brando didn't even attend his daughter's funeral. He couldn't, because he knew that much of the responsibility for Cheyenne's death lay with him. For years he hadn't been there for her, had watched from afar as her mental health deteriorated. Cheyenne had tried to reach out to her father many times, asked for help, but Brando was always busy, always somewhere else, always running away. When Cheyenne's last letter reached Brando, it read, "Dad, did you ever love me? Or was I just another role for you too? I can't take it anymore. I'm so tired. I hope one day you'll forgive me, but more importantly, I hope you'll forgive yourself." This letter hung framed in Brando's mansion. He read it every day, dying a little more inside each time. Now there was nowhere left to run. The guilt consumed him from within, and this feeling would never pass. Brando's obesity in his final years wasn't just a health problem. It was also the physical manifestation of a psychological collapse. His doctors had warned him repeatedly, told him he needed to go on a diet, but Brando wouldn't listen. At night he would go down to the kitchen alone and eat until dawn, with ice cream containers, potato chips, pizza orders. His housekeeper Angela Borlaza described in a documentary, "When I entered the kitchen in the mornings, I would find 12 empty pizza boxes on the table, ice cream containers, chocolate wrappers, everything." Brando had eaten alone all night, watched television, and then fallen asleep in his chair. Sometimes when I came in the morning, I would find him there, eyes open, television still running, but he was staring at the screen as if hypnotized. Food wasn't consolation for him. It was a method of punishment. Every bite was a regret. Every mouthful was an apology. By destroying his body, he was perhaps trying to suppress the pain in his soul, but nothing was ever enough. Brando's weight gain was so rapid that his doctors were shocked. While he weighed around 110 kilograms in 1995, by 2000 he had reached 150 kilograms. His movement became difficult. He even started having trouble breathing. He was diagnosed with diabetes, but didn't take his medications regularly. It was as if he was slowly orchestrating his own death. In 2002, Brando made a strange confession in a television interview. The interviewer wanted to talk about his achievements, his Oscar awards, but Brando kept bringing up his children. At one point, his eyes filled with tears, and he said, "All these awards, all this fame mean nothing. I wasn't a good father to my children, and now I'm paying the price. I can't sleep at night because I hear Cheyenne's voice. She's saying, 'Help me,' but there's nothing I can do anymore." Millions of people who watched the interview saw this moment, but most thought it was just a performance. After all, Brando was one of the best actors in history, but those close to him said the interview was real, that Brando had dropped his mask for the first time. When the interview ended, Brando thanked the camera crew and added, "I hope people watch this interview and hug their children, because that's the most important thing in life. Not money, not fame, just your loved ones." Angela Borlaza, one of the few staff members working at Brando's mansion, shocked everyone years later with what she told in a documentary. Angela said that Brando would write in his journal for hours at night, pouring out onto the pages he scrawled, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming. These journals were like therapy for him, but Angela's most striking claim was this: Brando would sometimes watch his old films. Alone in the dark living room, he would watch his younger self on the screen and cry silently. Angela said she heard him whisper, "Where did that young man go?" The once most powerful, most attractive man was now crying at the ghost of his own youth. Angela also added, "One day when I brought him coffee, I saw him looking at an old photograph. In the photo was a young, handsome Marlon Brando. He turned to me and asked, 'Was this me, Angela?' I said, 'Yes, Mr. Brando, it was you.' Tears started streaming from his eyes, and he said, 'That man is dead. He died a long time ago.'" So what exactly was written in those journals? In his will, Brando had given his lawyers very clear instructions. Immediately after his death, all his personal journals had to be burned, and so it was. When Brando died in 2004, his lawyers returned from UCLA Medical Center and went straight to the mansion and burned hundreds of pages of journals. Nobody knows exactly what was written on those pages, but there are clues that Brando gave to some close friends. In a letter to director Elia Kazan, Brando wrote, "I've written down the mistakes I made throughout my life, every one of them, every painful detail. But these secrets must go with me, because the world isn't ready to know them, and I won't be able to control how people remember me." Brando's lawyer David Seeley gave very limited information about the content of the journals years later. In an interview, he said, "Marlon had poured his soul into those journals. There were unforgivable letters he wrote to Cheyenne, his disappointment in Christian, his longing for his children in Tahiti. But most of all, there were accusations he wrote to himself. In every line he was blaming himself, questioning why he couldn't be a better father, trying to understand why he always ran away. Very few people visited Brando in his final years. One of them was actor Jack Nicholson. Nicholson shared striking details about Brando in an interview he gave in 2003. "The last time I visited Marlon, he showed me his old photographs, shots from A Streetcar Named Desire, The Godfather, Apocalypse Now. He looked at each one and said, 'This wasn't me, Jack. It was just a mask.' I asked him who the real Marlon was. He looked at me and said, 'I don't know, I never knew him.'" This anecdote from Nicholson was perhaps the story that best summarized Brando's existential crisis. As an actor, he had adopted so many different identities that he had lost his own essence. Nicholson continued, "When I was leaving that day, Marlon hugged me. He said he hadn't hugged anyone in a very long time. He was trembling in my arms as if he was very cold, but the room was warm. That trembling came from inside, from his soul." Brando's relationship with Hollywood was complex. In his youth, he was a man who rebelled against the system, changed scripts, challenged directors. The success that came with A Streetcar Named Desire in 1951 made him a star overnight. But Brando didn't like fame. In an interview he said, "Being famous is like a prison. Everyone knows you but nobody really knows you." Over the years, his faith in Hollywood completely vanished. When he won the Oscar for The Godfather, he didn't even attend the ceremony, instead sending Native American activist Sacheen Littlefeather. This move created a major scandal, but Brando didn't care. He no longer wanted to play Hollywood's games. The disputes he had with Francis Ford Coppola on The Apocalypse Now, set in 1979, were legendary. Brando had arrived on set very overweight, hadn't read the script, and told Coppola, "I don't know how you want to make this film, but I'm just going to improvise." The shooting lasted for months. Brando did something different every day, and Coppola was nearly going insane. But ultimately, the resulting performance became one of the most iconic roles in cinema history. Brando's Colonel Kurt's character was dark, insane, and impressive, just like Brando himself. In June of 2004, Brando's health began to deteriorate rapidly. His lungs weren't working properly, his heart was weak, and his diabetes was out of control. Doctors wanted to hospitalize him, but Brando refused. "I want to die at home," he said. But a few days later, his condition worsened so much that they had to call an ambulance. When he was taken to UCLA Medical Center, doctors knew there was very little they could do. Brando's body was no longer fighting. It was as if he wanted to embrace death. One of the doctors, Dr. Michael Roth, would later describe, "When Mr. Brando arrived, he was very weak, not physically but spiritually. There was no will to live in his eyes. He accepted treatment, but it seemed like it was just for formality. Deep down, he was ready to go." While lying in the hospital, one of the last people to visit Brando was his son Miko. When Miko came to his father's side, Brando's eyes were closed, but he was breathing. Miko held his hand and told his father, "I love you, Dad." Brando opened his eyes, looked at his son, and in a very weak voice said, "Forgive me." These were among his last words. Years later, when Miko recounted this moment, he cried, "My father spent his entire life waiting to be forgiven, but the one he really needed to forgive was himself. I told him, 'I forgive you, Dad. We all forgive you,' but I don't know if he heard." A few hours later, on the 1st of July 2004 at 6:20 in the evening, Marlon Brando said goodbye to life. He was 80 years old, but in his last 10 years, he had lived as if he were 100. When news of Brando's death spread around the world, reactions were mixed. Some remembered him as a genius, others as a troubled man. But everyone agreed on this. Marlon Brando had changed Hollywood forever. Actors before him came from the theater tradition, displaying performances full of exaggerated gestures and fake emotions. Brando brought reality. With the technique called method acting, he delved so deeply into the inner world of characters that his performance on screen became indistinguishable from real life. But this talent was also like a curse, because Brando forgot who he was in real life. Actor Robert De Niro said after Brando's death, "Marlon showed us what real acting was. Before him, everyone was playing roles. Marlon became the character. That difference is huge, but the price of this talent was also very heavy. His funeral was held with a small and intimate ceremony. A small number of people attended, consisting of close family members and a few friends. According to Brando's will, there would be no long speeches at his funeral. He would only be remembered in silence. His ashes were buried in a cemetery in Los Angeles, but some were also taken to Tahiti, to Tetiaroa Island. Brando had considered this island his own paradise for years. Perhaps the peace of his soul was there, far from the chaos of Hollywood, in the middle of the ocean. At the funeral, Jack Nicholson gave a brief speech. "Marlon wasn't just an actor to me. He was a teacher. He taught me not acting, but humanity. He taught me to be complex, to be flawed, but still to search. Now he has ended that search. I hope he found what he was looking for." After Brando's death, many people wrote about his legacy. Critics examined his filmography. Psychologists analyzed his personality. Fans remembered him.
But perhaps what best described Brando were his own words. In the final pages of his autobiography, he wrote, "My life became a paradox. Millions of people thought they knew me, but nobody really knew me. I didn't know myself either. Maybe that's why I was such a good actor, because I didn't have my own identity, so I could easily slip into others' identities. But now I've grown old, and when I look back, what do I see? An empty stage, and me standing alone in the middle, not knowing which role to play." Brando's loneliness in his final years wasn't just physical, it was also emotional and spiritual loneliness. Even if there were people around him, he felt alone because nobody could understand his real pain. The deaths of his children had wounded him so deeply that these wounds never healed. After Cheyenne's suicide, Brando told a friend, "There is nothing more painful for a parent than losing a child. But knowing your own responsibility in your child's death, this is an unbearable burden. I carry this burden every day, and it's killing me from the inside." Brando also had children in Tahiti. He had 2 children from his marriage to Tarita Teripaya, Tehotu and Cheyenne. But after Brando left Tahiti, his relationship with them weakened. Tehotu rarely saw his father, and this caused him great pain. In an interview, he said, "My father was a great actor, but a small father. I know he loved us, but he never learned to show love." It's hard to find a figure in Hollywood history as talented yet as tragic as Brando. His story isn't just about an actor's rise and fall, but also about a person's search for identity, struggle to be a father, and ultimately about being a loser. Brando's career was brilliant, but his private life was dark, and in his final years, this darkness completely consumed him. Brando was the father of 11 children in total, some from marriages, some from relationships, and some were illegitimate. He looked at each one differently, treated each one differently, but couldn't give any of them the father they fully needed. His eldest daughter, Rebecca, was born when her mother was Brando's assistant. Rebecca had seen her father very little, and this deeply affected her. In an interview, she said, "My father was an actor to be admired, but to me he was just a stranger." Today when we remember Brando, most of us think of his younger self. Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire, Vito Corleone in The Godfather, Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now. But Brando's real tragedy was the real person who was lost behind those iconic roles. A person named Marlon Brando Jr., born in Omaha, Nebraska, coming from a troubled family, whose relationship with his father was never good, who had to watch his mother's alcoholism. This child grew up, became world famous, but the wounds inside him never healed. And when he grew old, despite being rich and famous, he felt alone and lost, just like that little child. There was a poem that Brando wrote but never published. It was among the papers found in the mansion after his death. The poem read, "I wore masks, played roles, received applause, but I could never be myself. Now I'm old, the masks have fallen, and what's left? Just a stranger looking at me in the mirror." These lines reflected Brando's inner world very clearly. He had learned to be others throughout his life, but had never learned to be himself. In his final years, Brando's greatest comfort was music. He would play piano, listen to Django Reinhardt for hours, and sometimes sing jazz standards. Neighbors would sometimes hear piano sounds coming from the mansion at midnight. The melodies Brando played were sad and slow, as if each note was a tear. Music was an escape route for him. He could express through melodies the emotions he couldn't express with words. But music ultimately wasn't enough either, because some pains are so deep that no art form can heal them. Brando's relationship with Hollywood also completely changed over the years. In his youth, he was a rebel who opposed the system, challenged studio bosses, rejected scripts. But as he aged, he completely lost faith in Hollywood. In an interview, he said, "Hollywood buys your soul and gives you fame. I sold my soul, but what did I get in return? Empty fame, meaningless awards, and a hollow life." These words were perhaps a bit exaggerated, but they clearly expressed Brando's disillusionment. In 2003, about a year before his death, Brando appeared before cameras for the last time. It was a brief television interview, and Brando looked very ill, but there was still that old sparkle in his eyes. At the end of the interview, the journalist asked him, "If you could look back, what would you change in your life?" Brando remained silent for a long time, then said, "Everything. I would spend more time with my children. I would choose my family over my career. I would seek love instead of chasing money and fame. But it's too late now. The past doesn't change. You just learn to live with regrets." The day Brando died, doctors at UCLA Medical Center said his final hours passed very peacefully. He wasn't in pain, just tired. He closed his eyes and never opened them again. Some said this peaceful death was a sign that Brando had finally found inner peace, but the truth was probably more complex. Brando was just tired of living, struggling, suffering. Death for him wasn't an end, it was a liberation. Today, Marlon Brando's legacy lives on, not only through his films, but also through his tragic life story. He was a person who carried talent and curse at the same time. He changed the world with his acting, but could never fix his own world. He influenced millions of people, but couldn't protect the people he loved most, his own children. He gained wealth and fame, but never found true happiness. Marlon Brando's final years teach us something important. Success, fame, and money can never replace inner peace. Brando was a world-renowned actor, but there was a deep emptiness inside him. He tried everything to fill this emptiness: food, music, projects, relationships. But none of it worked, because the real problem wasn't outside, it was inside. Brando wasn't at peace with himself, and that's why he couldn't be at peace with the world either. Perhaps Brando's greatest tragedy was that until the end, he couldn't forgive himself. Cheyenne's death, Christian's years in prison, the children he left in Tahiti, his failed marriages. He blamed himself for all of these, and this guilt ate him up from the inside. Friends told him many times, "You can't change the past, Marlon. You must forgive yourself." But he couldn't. Because some mistakes are so heavy that forgiving them seems impossible. In his final years, Brando often said he wanted to go to Tahiti, to Techiroa Island, but his health condition didn't allow it. The island was a peaceful paradise for him, a place where he could live simply, away from the chaos of Hollywood. There he had made friendships with the local people, lived a simple life. Perhaps the real Marlon Brando was there, not the Hollywood star, just an ordinary man living by the ocean. But in his final years, he couldn't even go to Tahiti. He was imprisoned in his Los Angeles mansion, imprisoned in his own body, and regrets. Having to wake up every morning and live another day was like torture for him. He didn't want to live but was also afraid of dying. In this uncertainty, melting away a little more each day, he seemed to be slowly disappearing. Brando's story is also a warning. It shows us that being talented, being successful, being famous isn't enough. Being human, being truly human, is harder than all of these. Knowing yourself, building real relationships with your loved ones, acknowledging and forgiving your mistakes. These were things Brando could never fully accomplish, and that's why his life ended in tragedy. Now I want to ask something from you. Like this video, comment and share it, because Marlon Brando's story isn't just the story of a Hollywood legend, it's a life story full of lessons we can all learn. Brando showed us the dark side of success, taught us the price of fame, and most importantly, reminded us that true happiness isn't in material things, but in love and inner peace. Marlon Brando died in 2004, but his legacy still lives. His films continue to be watched, his acting still inspires, but I hope people remember not just his performances, but also his life story. Because Brando's real legacy isn't being a talented actor, it's being a tragic human. And this tragedy can teach us a lot, if we're ready to listen.
Finally, I want to end with Brando's own words. In the very last sentence of his autobiography, he wrote, "Life is a play, and we are all actors. But I played my role too well, so well that I forgot who my real self was. Now the curtain is closing, and it's time to leave the stage. I just hope the audience remembers me, not only for the roles I played, but also for the pain I lived." Marlon Brando's final days were dark, lonely, and full of pain, but perhaps within this darkness there was a light. Perhaps in the end, just before death, Brando found inner peace. Perhaps he left all his regrets, all his pain behind, and died in peace. We'll never know, but what we do know is this: Marlon Brando was one of the greatest actors in history, and also one of the most tragic people, and these two couldn't be separated because the source of his genius was his pain.